On the morning of August 13th, 2018, Chris Watts stood in his driveway in Colorado. His wife was missing, his daughters were gone, and yet he smiled. He spoke calmly to reporters, asking for his family to come home. But behind that ordinary face, his entire world was already buried, because evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles. This is the story of Chris Watts. Chris Watts was not the kind of man people feared. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. In most rooms, he barely existed at all. Neighbors remembered him as quiet and polite, the kind of man who held doors open, the kind of man who smiled but never said much. To the outside world, Chris Watts looked like a devoted husband, a man who worked hard, came home on time, and spent his weekends with his family. Inside that home lived Shanann Watts, energetic, outspoken, and deeply involved in documenting their family's life online. Their daughters, Bella and Celeste, were loud, playful, and full of energy. On social media, the Watts family looked happy. Birthday videos, vacation photos, family milestones carefully recorded. But online images don't show silence. By the early hours of August 13th, Chris Watts was already awake. He had not slept. His mind was not racing with panic. It was unusually calm. Shanann Watts arrived home shortly before 2 in the morning, returning from a business trip. She was exhausted, pregnant, and emotionally drained from weeks of tension in her marriage. She walked into a dark house, unaware that this was the final time she would cross that doorway. What followed was not a violent explosion. There were no screams. No neighbors heard anything unusual. According to Chris, the argument was quiet. Words spoken in low voices, accusations, fear, and the realization that the life Shanann believed in was already slipping away. At some point, the conversation stopped. Chris climbed onto the bed. He placed his hands around Shanann's neck, and he applied pressure. Not for seconds, but for minutes, long enough for her to struggle, long enough for her to realize that the man she trusted was ending her life. When it was over, Chris did not cry. He did not scream. As the sky began to lighten, Chris Watts prepared to leave the house. He moved carefully, methodically. He wrapped Shanann's body and carried her to his truck. His daughters followed him, quiet, confused. During the drive to the oil site, Chris said very little. The road was familiar. He had driven it countless times for work. This time, it led him away from the life he was leaving behind. At the site, Chris completed what he had already decided hours earlier. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby and placed his daughters into separate oil tanks. Then he cleaned up and went to work. He spoke to coworkers. He checked his phone. He behaved like a man whose world was still intact. When Shanann stopped responding to messages, concern quickly grew. A close friend called police. Officers arrived at the Watts home within hours. Chris greeted them at the door, calm, cooperative, smiling. Inside the house, everything looked normal. Shoes by the door, toys on the floor. But something felt wrong. Chris showed no visible fear, no urgency, no natural panic for a man whose pregnant wife and children were missing. When he later spoke to the media, the unease only grew stronger. He smiled while asking for his family to come home. His words sounded rehearsed. His emotions felt distant. Investigators noticed the cracks, small inconsistencies, a timeline that didn't quite fit, body language that betrayed him. Under increasing pressure, Chris Watts confessed, not in a dramatic breakdown, but in the same calm tone he had used from the beginning. Psychologists later classified him as a family annihilator, a person who destroys their own family not out of sudden rage, but to escape responsibility and start over. Chris Watts is now serving life in prison. He still speaks politely, still sounds calm, as if the man he was before never truly existed. But evil doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks normal. It blends in. It waits. Evil has a pulse, and this was its heartbeat.